In today's video, we're examining people eaten alive during safari trips, where safety failed by inches. From an open-sided bus near Hoedspruit, where a lion found the one latch that didn't hold, to a glamping camp in Katmai, where a brown bear followed scent through a tent wall. We begin in Manapools, where wild dogs drove a leopard from a tree and straight toward a cameraman. It was June 11th, 2014, and the early morning air hung cool and still across the riverine woodland of Manapools in northern Zimbabwe. Dawn light filtered through acacia branches, casting long shadows across pale sand and dry grass that crackled underfoot. The seasonal channel nearby held only scattered pools, their surfaces mirror-flat in the windless quiet. A few kilometers away, a small safari vehicle rolled slowly along a two-track road, its engine a low hum beneath the rising chorus of francolin calls and the distant bark of baboons. Inside, 6 passengers leaned forward with cameras ready, tracking movement through the trees where a pack of painted dogs had been sighted minutes earlier. Rico Saldana was 38, a Spanish office IT technician on leave, traveling through Zimbabwe on a booked photo safari. Wildlife photography was his hobby, not his profession. Friends described him as methodical, with equipment, and patient in the field. He had selected a small group concession, known for extended sightings and strict vehicle discipline. That morning's drive included tracking painted dogs moving along a floodplain edge. Before departure, the guide reviewed the rules. Remain inside the vehicle at all times. No standing on seats. No stepping onto the ground during predator activity. And if a large cat descended from a tree, the vehicle would withdraw immediately. Firearms, the guide added, were for last resort protection only, and could not be discharged unless there was clear imminent danger to human life. The woodland was dry and pale, visibility shifting by the yard. Open sand patches alternated with waist-high shrubs and fallen limbs capable of concealing an animal at close range. Adult male leopards in Manapools typically weigh between 110 and 170 pounds. They rely on ambush and short bursts rather than long pursuit. When pressured by African wild dogs, they often climb to avoid injury. If forced down, they usually drive toward the nearest dense cover rather than open ground. Shortly after dawn, the group located the dogs. Their contact calls tightened and accelerated toward a large male leopard near a termite mound. The leopard climbed a forked tree roughly 12 feet high. The guide reminded the group that if the leopard dropped, the vehicle would reverse and end the sighting. Rico shifted along the vehicle's side to clear a branch from his lens line. Seeking a lower angle, he stepped down from the floor rail to the ground beside the rear tire. The guide immediately instructed him to get back inside. Rico acknowledged, but remained focused through the viewfinder. Below the tree, the dogs circled and made short vertical jumps at the trunk. The leopard's tail flicked. It repeatedly scanned toward a band of thicker brush, directly behind Rico's position. The leopard descended without vocalization. It landed on the far side of the trunk and moved low through shrubs in 2 rapid strides, using cover to obscure its approach. Rico pivoted with the camera raised. The recovered footage shows a sudden drop in frame as he stepped backward over a fallen limb and fell onto his right side. The guide shouted commands to the driver and maneuvered the vehicle forward to create engine noise and visual presence. As the vehicle advanced and the horn sounded, the dogs widened their circle and scattered outward momentarily, creating a brief gap in their harassment. The leopard, now seeing a single grounded human between itself and the thicker cover it had been scanning toward, closed the remaining distance in a short burst, a rapid displacement response rather than calculated predation. The leopard struck with a single forceful impact that drove Rico onto his shoulder and upper torso. The camera fell and continued recording unstable ground-level images, while the leopard secured a grip near the side of the neck and shoulder. Because concession rules restrict firearm discharge except in extreme necessity and clear line of sight, the guide did not fire immediately. The leopard's position, partially obscured by brush and close to the victim, limited safe angles. The leopard maintained a stabilizing bite at the side of the neck and shoulder, a control hold large cats use to immobilize prey. Rico's visible movement diminished rapidly in the recording. The leopard then dragged him several feet into thicker vegetation, reducing visibility further. Only once the leopard shifted slightly away from the body and a clearer line of fire opened did the guide discharge a single round into the soil near the brush line to create additional disturbance. The shot was intended as a deterrent rather than a direct strike, consistent with escalation protocols. The leopard released and moved deeper into cover, staying low rather than climbing again. When the group reached Rico, he was unresponsive. There was heavy bleeding from the neck and upper chest, consistent with deep puncture wounds and tearing. The injuries were concentrated, consistent with a sustained cervical control bite rather than repeated swiping. Responders noted limited additional tissue damage at the shoulder region, which the coroner later described as brief post-incapacitation feeding behavior occurring during the short interval before the group could safely close the distance. Park control was radioed within approximately 1 minute of the strike. Evacuation proceeded by vehicle over an uneven track to the nearest ranger post, roughly 20 minutes away under dry conditions. No advanced medical team was available at the scene. Transfer to a clinic required an additional 90 minutes by road. Rico was pronounced dead on arrival. The coroner's summary attributed death to catastrophic blood loss and cervical trauma caused by a large felid bite. The report noted that incapacitation would have occurred rapidly due to vascular injury. The safari operator revised its briefing language to reinforce the prohibition against stepping down from vehicles during active predator sightings. The park recorded the death as a wildlife fatality during a game drive. Later that morning, the painted dogs resumed movement along the channel. The site showed flattened grass, drag marks into brush, disturbed soil, and a single spent casing partially embedded near the edge of the track. Footage of the incident was kept from the public eye due to its high level of graphic content. The spent casing in the dust marked the moment a camera's safe distance stopped mattering. And 2 years later, near Hoedspruit, an Australian electrician learned the same lesson when a pale male lion tested a rattling panel and climbed into an open-sided safari bus. It was September 3rd, 2016, and the afternoon air across the private reserves bordering Hoedspruit carried the dry, mineral scent of late winter in the South African lowveld. The sky stretched pale blue and cloudless, the sun angling lower but still sharp enough to bleach the color from thorn trees and pale grass that lined the sandy two-track roads winding through the reserve. Nolan Kai was 29, an electrician from Newcastle, Australia. He wired commercial buildings, office blocks, apartment towers, and had saved nearly a year for a safari in South Africa. He chose a smaller, lower-cost operator that advertised closer sightings. Nolan trusted built systems. If something was engineered for safety, he believed it would function as intended. He had followed instructions since arrival. Remain seated, keep arms inside, avoid sudden movement. The open-sided safari bus used drop-down transparent polycarbonate panels secured by 2 upper latches. One rear panel, beside Nolan's seat, had only one functioning latch. The second catch showed visible wear. Staff had noted vibration from that section over uneven terrain. Nolan heard the rattle earlier, but treated it as normal mechanical noise. The air was dry and cool. Thorn trees cast narrow shade across pale grass and a sandy 2-track road. Adult male lions in managed reserves commonly weigh between 350 and 500 pounds. They can accelerate rapidly over short distances and are capable of standing upright on their hind legs to investigate objects at shoulder height. When habituated to vehicles, they sometimes test surfaces with their muzzle and forepaws. A forepaw can extend several inches through a narrow gap. Once contact is made, downward force and body weight can widen weak openings quickly. The guide stopped to allow filming of a pale-maned male resting beneath acacia branches. After several minutes, the lion rose and walked toward the bus at a steady pace. The engine idled. Passengers shifted slightly for better angles. As someone leaned across the aisle, the loose rear panel flexed again. The lion's focus shifted toward that movement. The vehicle remained stationary longer than typical for a close approach. The lion moved within a few feet, pacing parallel to the rear quarter. Interior movement caused the single latch to vibrate repeatedly. Under lateral pressure and engine vibration, the latch slipped. The panel dropped inward several inches, leaving an opening roughly 2 inches wide at the edge. The lion inserted a forepaw through the gap. 2 inches was tight but sufficient for claw entry. It applied downward pressure while pushing its muzzle against the panel seam. The polycarbonate bowed under the combined force. Under sustained shoulder pressure, the upper mounting rivets began to shear. The frame bent further, and the panel partially detached from its upper track on one side, widening the opening substantially. The lion forced its head, and then both forelimbs inside as the panel hung at an angle, no longer secured at the top. Passengers pressed toward the opposite side of the bus. Nolan stood instinctively to climb over the bench and away from the opening. That upward movement placed him within reach of the lion's extended forelimbs. The lion hooked the fabric at Nolan's thigh and pulled. The guide accelerated abruptly. The rear tire spun in soft sand before gaining traction. For several seconds, the vehicle hesitated as the wheels struggled to grip the loose surface. During that interval, the lion secured a stronger hold with both forelimbs braced against the interior seat frame. The panel bent further under strain. Nolan lost balance and was pulled toward the opening. Witness footage later reviewed showed his lower body sliding across the flexed panel before he fell onto the sand beside the bus. The lion immediately withdrew its head and forelimbs from the vehicle and exited around the rear corner. It reached Nolan within seconds, striking with its forepaws and forcing him onto his side. The lion gripped high along the thigh first, using its forelimbs to stabilize. The guide continued revving the engine and sounding the horn. The vehicle began moving forward, but could not safely reverse without risking additional passengers. The lion shifted position, adjusting its bite toward the side of the neck and shoulder. Large cats typically seek control at the cervical region to reduce resistance. Witnesses described Nolan's visible movement diminishing quickly after this repositioning. Feeding behavior began shortly thereafter. Rangers later documented tearing at the upper thigh and abdominal region consistent with early consumption patterns in lion predation, where softer tissue is accessed once control is established. The lion dragged Nolan approximately 15 feet into low thorn brush, partially obscured from the road. The base was radioed immediately. Reserve rangers arrived in approximately 10 minutes. As a second vehicle approached within closer range, the lion disengaged and moved several yards away, remaining alert but no longer feeding. Nolan was located at the brush line. He was unresponsive. Extensive cervical trauma and significant blood loss were evident. Due to the severity of injuries and absence of vital signs, no advanced resuscitation was initiated on site. Transport to the main gate followed, with clinic confirmation shortly afterward. A lay summary of the coroner's findings cited cervical compression injury combined with catastrophic blood loss, with injury distribution consistent with documented lion predation, grappling with forelimbs, cervical control bite, and initial feeding at thigh and abdominal regions. The vehicle was removed from service within days. Internal review identified latch fatigue and insufficient inspection procedures. The operator's permit was temporarily suspended pending compliance upgrades. The reserve instituted mandatory dual latch verification before each drive and replaced polycarbonate drop panels with reinforced multi-point locking systems. Nolan's footage was retained for investigation. Non-incident recordings were later returned to his family. The panel's gap was only inches wide, but it was enough, and a year earlier on the Chobe River in northern Botswana, a quiet Swedish lab technician watched an aluminum safari boat drift off its line as the water in front of the bow began to surge. It was May 19, 2015, and the late afternoon light across the Chobe River in northern Botswana had softened into the golden hour that photographers wait for, warm, amber, and forgiving. The air was still and humid, carrying the earthy smell of wet reeds and sun-warmed mud from the exposed banks that lined the river's edge. Lena Maradi was 41, a laboratory technician from Uppsala, Sweden. She worked for a pharmaceutical supplier, calibrating spectrometers and validating chemical assays. Co-workers described her as careful and systematic. She had saved for 2 years to take this safari with her younger sister, Yasmin. The trip was not impulsive. It was scheduled between production audits at work. She wanted quiet river photography, elephants at dusk, birds in silhouette, reflections on still water. She selected a smaller 6-passenger aluminum craft rather than a larger tour boat. She believed fewer people meant less noise and more control. She wore her camera strap looped twice around her wrist, a habit from photographing coastal storms along the Baltic Sea. She had read about elephants and hippos before traveling. She did not research crocodile strike distance in low boats. The Chobe River that evening was slow and shallow near shore, with exposed mud shelves, papyrus reeds, and sudden drop-offs where depth shifted from 3 feet to more than 8 within a few yards. Large Nile crocodiles in this stretch regularly exceed 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators that strike upward from below the surface. A crocodile can launch more than half its body length vertically in under a second. Their bite force is among the strongest measured in living animals. They clamp and hold, then rotate in what is known as a death roll, using torque to disable prey and tear flesh. Feeding often begins once prey is subdued, even if submersion is ongoing. The boat operator slowed to idle while passengers photographed a bull elephant grazing upriver. Wind shifted across the channel and nudged the bow toward a shaded reed margin. The engine remained in neutral. The boat drifted closer to a darker patch of water where the river dropped sharply in depth. Yasmin later reported hearing a hollow splash against the hull behind the port side. There was no warning wake, no visible ripple. The crocodile struck vertically. Its jaws clamped onto Lena's left forearm and side as she turned toward the sound. Witness footage later recovered shows a violent lurch and spray before she was pulled across the gunnel. The strike to submersion interval lasted less than 2 seconds. Passengers shifted backward in panic, rocking the boat. The operator attempted reverse throttle, but the propeller churned air as the hull tilted unevenly. Beneath the surface, the crocodile initiated a roll. The first rotation twisted Lena's torso while maintaining a locked bite. The torque fractured her forearm and dislocated her shoulder. The second roll pulled her fully under. Silt and bubbles obscured the water's surface. Approximately 15 seconds after the initial strike, the crocodile resurfaced about 20 feet away, with Lena still clamped in its jaws. Witnesses saw her upper body partially visible above water. The crocodile adjusted its grip higher along her torso near the shoulder and neck. This repositioning is common before submerging prey again. She was dragged under a second time. The crocodile moved toward deeper water along the drop-off. Another safari boat, roughly 300 yards upstream, heard screaming and radioed authorities immediately. The operator of Lena's boat kept the engine running, attempting to follow surface disturbance, but visibility was limited. Roughly 4 minutes after the initial strike, the crocodile resurfaced near the reed margin. Witnesses observed short vertical head movements consistent with tearing behavior. At this stage, feeding had begun. Crocodiles typically begin removing tissue from limbs and flanks once prey is immobilized. Blood was visible spreading across the surface before dispersing downstream. The animal submerged again with its prey. Rangers arrived approximately 20 minutes after the first radio call. By then, the water had smoothed. The crocodile submerged upon hearing engine approach. Recovery operations extended several hours along the channel edge. Lena's body was located downstream later that evening. Coroner's report listed cause of death as traumatic injury and exsanguination due to multiple bite wounds and rotational tearing, consistent with Nile crocodile feeding behavior. Significant tissue loss to the upper extremity and lateral torso was documented. Water in the airway indicated submersion during the attack. The pattern of injury matched documented predation mechanics. Park authorities temporarily restricted small boat drift near reed-lined drop-offs and reinforced minimum standoff distances from shaded banks during low water season. The operator updated protocol to prohibit engine idling near abrupt depth changes. International coverage was limited. A brief regional article referenced a fatal crocodile attack during a river safari without naming the victim. Online discussion declined within days. Yasmin returned to Sweden with the camera card. The final clear image was taken minutes before the strike, an elephant in amber light on the far bank. The dark water beside the boat showed no sign of disturbance. The predator had already been positioned below the surface. The Chobe boat proved how a few inches of bad positioning can turn a safe platform into a trap. But outside Ranthambore in Rajasthan, a cautious Jaipur hardware shop owner learned the same lesson when a Bengal tiger tested a misseated Jeep door seam and pulled him through it. It was February 7, 2018, and the afternoon air in the buffer zone outside Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan carried the dry, dusty warmth of late winter in northern India. The sky stretched pale and hazy, the sun filtering through a thin veil of atmospheric dust that softened its edges and cast everything in muted tones: beige scrub, gray-brown earth, and the skeletal branches of leafless trees that lined the narrow dirt tracks winding through the reserve. Jai Nand was 33 and owned a small hardware shop in Jaipur that sold hinges, drill bits, and replacement latches. He was known for repairing worn fittings rather than discarding them. The safari was a birthday outing organized by two cousins. He had never entered a tiger reserve before. At home, he was cautious and methodical. The trip was a brief break from routine. He booked a budget Jeep through a local operator. The vehicle was older, with sliding metal door panels secured by a latch that caught a narrow internal lip. Jai noticed the panel beside him did not sit perfectly flush when closed. A thin seam remained visible along the vertical edge. The guide pushed the panel inward once and confirmed it was latched. Jai accepted that and remained seated beside the door because the interior space was limited. The Jeep moved through dry scrub and pale winter grass. Dust lifted from the track as langur calls echoed from scattered trees. Adult male Bengal tigers in Ranthambore commonly weigh between 400 and 500 pounds. They rely on short ambush bursts rather than prolonged pursuit. When destabilizing prey, a tiger may first grip a limb or flank before shifting to a throat bite that compresses the airway and carotid vessels. Once control is achieved, it drags prey into cover and begins feeding if undisturbed. Earlier that afternoon, forest staff had advised drivers not to linger near fresh pug marks. When the driver later spotted clear tracks crossing the road, the Jeep stopped. The engine idled. The group waited longer than usual for a possible sighting. Jai remained near the door seam, his left leg angled toward the panel due to seat positioning. Several minutes later, a large male tiger emerged from the brush to the left and walked parallel to the Jeep at a steady pace. The guide instructed everyone to remain still. Jai held his phone but did not raise it. The tiger approached within a few feet of the vehicle. It lowered its head and pressed its nose along the seam of the door. It then struck the metal panel with its forepaw. The initial impact did not open the door. However, under repeated pressure, the worn latch began to shift. The metal panel flexed inward slightly under load. The seam widened incrementally as the frame deformed. The widening was not static. Without pressure, the gap would have remained narrow. Under the tiger's weight and shoulder force, the panel bowed inward enough to create a temporary opening of just over 2 inches. That flex allowed the animal to insert part of its forepaw through the seam. Jai attempted to pull his leg back, but his knee was braced against the seat frame. The tiger hooked the fabric at the trouser leg and applied a backward pull. The driver accelerated, but loose gravel reduced traction. The vehicle dipped slightly toward the shoulder, increasing lateral pressure against the flexing panel. The tiger forced its shoulder harder against the door. Under the combined load from the animal's weight and the vehicle's slight tilt, the latch tongue bent under sustained force. The retaining lip began to shear away from the mounting screws. The panel continued to flex, and the gap widened beyond its resting position as the mechanical connection failed. The tiger then secured a bite high on Jai's thigh near the hip and pulled backward. As the mounting screws pulled partially free from the frame, the latch slipped completely. Jai's grip on the seat frame failed as his lower body cleared the door opening. With a second backward surge powered by its hind legs, the tiger dragged him fully from the vehicle onto the dirt track. The guide struck the door frame with a metal rod and shouted for the driver to reverse, but the engine stalled briefly. The tiger released the thigh and immediately repositioned. It shifted its jaws to the side of Jai's neck and clamped across the throat. The hold was sustained and compressive. Witness footage later recovered shows the tiger bracing its forelegs and pulling Jai approximately 15 feet into thicker brush beyond the road's edge. Within the vegetation, the tiger maintained the throat bite until voluntary movement ceased. It then adjusted the body onto its side. Feeding began shortly after. Initial tearing motions were directed at the upper hindquarter and inner thigh, where muscle mass was accessible. Dust at the brush line darkened rapidly. The driver restarted the engine and moved the Jeep several yards forward while radioing forest control. Rangers arrived in approximately 12 minutes. By the time additional vehicles approached with horns sounding, the tiger had dragged the body deeper into cover and retreated into dense woodland. Forest staff recovered Jai roughly 20 minutes after extraction. Scene assessment documented active predation, including removal of muscle tissue from the upper leg and abdominal region, consistent with early-stage tiger feeding behavior. The coroner later determined the primary cause of death to be cervical compression and massive hemorrhage from a throat bite consistent with a large adult tiger. Secondary findings confirmed perimortem and immediate post-mortem feeding. An internal review found multiple vehicles in the operator's fleet with worn or misaligned door latches. The permit was temporarily suspended pending inspection. Ranthambore authorities issued a bulletin requiring latch inspections before each drive and advising operators not to idle near fresh tracks. After the incident, the bent panel was replaced and reinforced. Post-incident examination showed that the latch tongue had bent under repeated force, and 2 of the 3 mounting screws had pulled partially free from the frame. Measurements taken under applied pressure showed that while the resting seam was narrow, sustained force caused the metal to flex and the mechanical connection to fail, sufficient for a paw to enter and, once leverage was established, for a tiger to extract a seated passenger. A seam, barely wider than 2 inches, was enough to let a tiger pull a man from a moving vehicle in Rajasthan. And 5 years earlier, on a cold gravel shoreline in Katmai, a different barrier, just canvas and aluminum, failed the same way when a coastal brown bear followed scent into a private tent and did not leave empty-mouthed. It was August 22, 2013, and the night air along the Naknek Lake shoreline in the Katmai area of Alaska had dropped into the low 40s, carrying the damp, mineral smell of cold gravel and tidal flats exposed by the receding water. The sky above was moonless and dense with stars, their light barely enough to outline the dark shapes of spruce trees that bordered the camp or the low ridgeline of mountains rising black against the northern horizon. Caden Rourke was 31, an app developer from Seattle who treated wildlife photography as his main hobby outside work. He wasn't affiliated with any production. He traveled on vacation and paid for the lodge's highest-tier bear viewing package because it offered a private shoreline tent set away from the main cabins, giving him a clear angle for dawn and dusk photos without crowds or cabin lights in the background. He carried a mid-range DSLR with a long lens, spare batteries, and a small tripod, the kind of kit a serious hobbyist brings when they want clean shots, not a viral moment. He was methodical in the way he planned trips. Before flying north, he read the lodge's guidelines and National Park Service advisories, watched basic safety briefings, and bought bear spray he kept within reach. But he also believed he could shape a photo opportunity through small choices: lighting, placement, scent, timing. Earlier that evening, after dinner service, he trimmed fat from 2 Wagyu steaks he'd brought in a cooler and set scraps in a shallow pan outside the tent, intending to draw a bear close enough for low-light photos from inside the canvas. 2 staff members noticed the odor during cleanup and mentioned it in passing. No one physically removed the pan, and no formal escalation occurred. That week, salmon movement along the Naknek system had been uneven, and bears were spending more time traveling shorelines and checking camps for easy calories, especially where scent pooled near structures. Adult coastal brown bears in Katmai can weigh roughly 800 to 1,200 pounds and stand over 9 feet tall when upright. Their sense of smell can pick up concentrated food odor from long distances if wind direction holds. When bears associate camps with food, they often approach in a deliberate, step-by-step pattern: pause, test, push, listen, then commit once they confirm reward. In tight spaces, that investigative behavior can flip quickly into incapacitation, and feeding can begin as soon as resistance drops. A ranger briefing that morning emphasized strict food storage and warned that night air along lake edges can trap scent low to the ground, pulling it toward tents. Caden acknowledged the warning. Later, when a junior employee pointed out the meat smell near his tent line, Caden said he would remove the scraps after he finished setting his camera. The pan remained outside. Just after 12:40 a.m., wind shifted inland. A bear traveling the brush edge paused, changed direction, and moved toward the tent line. Motion-triggered shoreline cameras later showed the approach at a steady walk, head low, nose working. Inside the tent, Caden turned on his phone light. The first contact was a heavy push against the outer wall that bowed an aluminum support pole inward. The second contact involved claw engagement and sustained pulling. The canvas tore vertically by about 3 feet. Caden moved backward across the sleeping pad. The tent interior measured roughly 8 by 10 feet, leaving limited room to move. A tripod, hard cases, and a duffel partially blocked the rear corner. The bear inserted its head and shoulders through the tear, drawn by the pan outside and residual food odor inside the tent fabric and gear. Witnesses in cabins roughly 70 yards away reported low impacts and tearing fabric. Gravel displacement patterns later showed repeated weight shifts inside the tent footprint, consistent with the animal stepping in and bracing as the structure flexed. The bear advanced fully inside. Structural collapse followed when the central ridgepole bent and dropped, folding the canvas inward and compressing the space. In food-conditioned encounters, brown bear attacks commonly begin with a forelimb strike and a bite aimed at disabling movement. Evidence from the site indicated rapid incapacitation within the collapsed perimeter. Damage patterns and biological evidence showed the bear remained inside the tent area for several minutes after incapacitation. Forensic analysis confirmed feeding activity occurred before deterrents were deployed. The behavior aligned with food-motivated predation rather than a brief defensive swat and withdraw. Staff in hardened cabins heard the disturbance and initiated emergency protocol. Within roughly 2 minutes of confirmed entry, the lodge manager radioed park dispatch. Floodlights were activated. Air horns sounded in timed bursts. A flare was launched from behind a vehicle barrier. The deterrents changed the bear's posture. It exited at a walk, moved toward brush, paused once, then disappeared beyond the light perimeter. Staff approached only after visual confirmation it had left. The tent structure had fully collapsed. On-site stabilization was attempted, but injuries were catastrophic. The nearest ranger unit reached the dock area about 40 minutes after the first call. Weather conditions prevented immediate aircraft evacuation. Boat transport extended total transfer time beyond 90 minutes. The coroner's summary listed cause of death as traumatic injuries consistent with brown bear mauling with evidence of predatory feeding behavior, including crushing injury, deep bite wounds, and tissue loss consistent with consumption prior to intervention. Toxicology was negative. No evidence suggested provocation beyond food scent and proximity. The lodge released a brief statement acknowledging a fatal wildlife incident and suspended shoreline tent accommodations. Internal correspondence later circulated in outdoor photography forums describing staff concern about intentional scent placement earlier that evening. The following season, shoreline tents were removed and replaced with elevated reinforced cabins. Mandatory nightly food checks were added, and deliberate scent baiting became a removal offense. Within days, wind and tide reshaped the gravel spit. Bears continued using the same shoreline travel routes. The only widely shared image from the trip remained a twilight photograph taken hours before, an amber-lit bear across the lake, captured from what still felt like a safe distance, before scent and canvas proved how thin that separation really was. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.